everyone, welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is historical evolution of capitalism. In this lecture, we shall discuss important aspects pertaining to the topic of historical evolution of capitalism. This lecture shall also examine various causes responsible for the rise of capitalism with a special focus towards the Western Europe. This lecture shall also examine various debates pertaining to the topic historical evolution of capitalism. And we shall also reflect on the working of capitalism in the contemporary times. To begin with, we all know that capitalism is an economic system based on private property and investment of resources such as money for profit. Now, when we go by this definition of capitalism as an economic system, then it stands completely different from economic models like socialism, where there was emphasis on state ownership of production and distribution. When we talk about capitalism, we must understand that trade and exchange always existed in the world polity. But when we talk about modern capitalism, this phenomena can be specifically located towards Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, especially countries like Great Britain, the Netherlands. They all have important examples to illustrate that how capitalism prevailed in the 16th and 17th centuries here. So when we talk about the time framework to understand modern capitalism, it is the first half of the 19th century, and therein we also must factor in that how capitalism, especially in Western Europe, in the 16th and 17th centuries onwards, arose. When we talk about capitalism, the focus on market exchange, division of labor are important aspects. With market exchange and division of labor, there was a focus towards increasing trade, leading to more profit amongst others. Now, herein we must understand that capitalism needs to be understood with a special focus towards decline of feudalism. It is only after feudalism that capitalism comes up. So with the downfall of feudalism, an important aspect that one must ponder in that how the modern scientific outlook prevailing in society, polity, culture, as well as economics were important causes then responsible for the rise of capitalism. As we are discussing causes responsible for the rise of capitalism, let us quote from an important work by Hywell Williams. Allow me to quote from this important work by Hywell Williams, that is, capitalism is one of history's most famous isms, but its significance cannot be grasped by those who conceive of it as an abstract and impersonal force. So therefore, when we talk about capitalism, one must understand that how capitalism as a phenomena needs to be understood with an important focus of it being an important force in society. Quoting Hywell Williams further, that determinist approach was a part of a fashionable consensus in Western historiography during the mid to the late 20th century. Further, human agency, individual ideas, and the shifting pattern of day-to-day events were accorded a less central central role in the narrative which has been there by historians. This is the remark and perspective by Hywell Williams. Quoting further, Hywell Williams, capitalism's deep roots, together with its capacity for renewal, raise the possibility that this is a phenomenon whose history is coeval with that of settled urban civilization. The classic form of capitalism adopted in the West has been grounded on that civilization's custodianship of the notion of human dignity, rule of law. Further, that is the history of capitalism can only be understood in an international dimension with a multidisciplinary focus. So therefore, as we are understanding historical evolution of capitalism, one has to see that how within the Western European setup, development of capitalism therefore needs to be also seen that how it occurred within the transatlantic economy. Now we all know that the idea of exchange and trade always existed in the world. An important example of a global route in the ancient times is that of the Silk Route that stretched across Eurasia, connecting east and west for centuries, and the network of trade routes enabled merchants to travel. It not only connected China and the Far East with countries in Europe and the Middle East, but also that it was an earliest example of capitalism as well as globalization. Further, we find that with the developments in human civilization, there were changes also in how economic practices were conducted. An example here, earlier there was barter. What do we mean by barter? The act of trading goods or services between two or more parties without the use of money. China, if we go by important historical accounts, it developed a system of paper money somewhere around 770 BC approximately. Further, when we go by some other important archives, paper money came up in United States dating back to 1690. And so this change in format of transaction from barter to using paper money, rise of currency, was an important aspect with reference to rise of trade, rise of monetary transaction, and this must be factored in while understanding historical development of capitalism. Adam Smith, in his very important book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, commonly known as The Wealth of Nations, this book was published in 1776. Now, in this book, Adam Smith presents some very important aspects, and these aspects also give us some philosophical insights with reference to understanding historical evolution of capitalism. Adam Smith points out that the individual need to fulfill self-interest results in societal benefit. The freedom to produce and exchange goods as they please, namely, that is free trade, and opening the markets up to domestic and foreign competition. People's natural self-interest would promote greater prosperity than with stringent government regulation. In this aspect, we must understand that feudalism existed in Europe till 1400 AD. Feudalism ended with Renaissance in Europe. There was increase in communication, increase in trade, growth of more towns, And herein, the expansion of trade led to more stability. There was rise of the new merchant class. So herein, we see that how feudalism then collapsed, and this was an ample condition for the rise of capitalism. And quoting an important perspective from Adam Smith, that how individual needs to fulfill self-interest could be best sought by ensuring free market. Further, the Great Famine from 1315 to 1317 also led to decline in agricultural production, and somewhere this was also responsible for pushing the economic activities towards exchange for more profit and for more trade to lead to better prosperity in society. Now, when we talk about end of feudalism, at the same time we must, which was also an important factor for the development of capitalism now in the Western Europe. Renaissance in Europe signified great revival of arts, science, literature and human freedom. Renaissance from 14th century to the 17th century promoted the rediscovery of classical philosophy, literature and arts. In 1450, with the invention of the Gutenberg printing press, it allowed for improved communication. Further, when we are talking about Renaissance, one must also understand that at the same time, scientific discoveries led to major shifts in thinking. The work of Galileo, Descartes presented a new vision of astronomy and mathematics. During the Renaissance, the European economy grew in trade. Developments like improvement in banking, expansion of trade routes, new manufacturing systems led to an overall increase in commercial activities as well. As we are understanding historical evolution of capitalism, an important sociological text also gives us some interesting insights. We shall now refer to the work of German sociologist Max Weber on capitalism. Now, capitalism in Northern Europe evolved when the Protestant, particularly the Calvinist ethic, influenced large number of people to engage in the secular world, developing their own enterprise, engaging in trade, accumulation of wealth for investment. Referring to the book written by Max Weber, the German sociologist, the very important book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. This work tells us that how alternative explanation based on culture, the Calvinist work ethic or the Puritan work ethic somewhere was an important aspect when we debate on the topic of how capitalism developed. Puritanism created a work ethic. And what was that? That is valuing of work for its own sake rather than for any result. So therefore we find that how all of it was an important aspect that led in orientation of the work as well as the economic activities. Further, what do we mean by spirit of capitalism? The spirit of capitalism signified ideas that favor rational pursuit of economic gains. The modern spirit of capitalism sees profit as an end in itself and pursuing profit as virtuous. One must refer to The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, the book by Max Weber, for further insights. Now, in this book, there is use of idle types. Now, idle types are analytical tools for interpretative, explanatory work. The social scientist creates idle types by abstracting elements from concrete historical situations, then combining the elements into a meaningful conceptual unit. So, according to Max Weber, the spirit of capitalism combines two elements. And what are they? Namely, an absolute ethical duty to accumulate capital and to do so in a rigorously calculative, rational way. Further, when we are talking about historical evolution and development of capitalism, industrial revolution also played a very important role. Industrial revolution led to industrialization, rise of big factories, mass enterprises. Industrialization required significant work and investment from individuals and not just from the government. So in this scenario, industrial revolution also somewhere propelled towards adoption of capitalism, the focus towards private property, investment, profit making as important with reference to working out industrialization, mass enterprises, amongst others. Another important aspect while we talk about rise of capitalism, especially looking at the 16th and 17th century Western Europe, it's that of imperialism. It is often argued when we talk about imperialism and refer to the important work by John A. Hobson, Imperialism, a Study, 1902. In this work, John A. Hobson points out that how imperialism needs to be seen as an outcome of the capitalist system. Further, the mention about how increasing concentration of wealth within the richer countries leading to underconsumption for the mass of people. So here and then, over expansion was a way to reduce cost. Further, when we are talking about imperialism with reference to historical evolution of capitalism, another important work that we must refer to is that of Lenin, who pointed out that imperialism, as we see at the beginning of the 20th century, it's a stage of capitalism. Why? Because colonial expansion and imperialist rivalry were rooted in profound changes in the nature of capitalism that time. Therefore, Lenin says that imperialism at the beginning of 20th century, it's a stage of capitalism. That is monopolies to exploit labor and natural resources, exportation of finance capital rather than manufactured goods, which were essential to sustain colonialism, which is an integral function of imperialism. So therefore, when we are discussing about capitalism with respect to historical evolution, another important insight on this aspect comes from Benno Teschke's work, that is the myth of 1648, class, geopolitics and the making of modern international relations. Benno Teschke's work we refer to in order to understand capitalism, its historical origins with reference to the bigger framework of international relations. Now, for Benno Teschke, we all know that Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 has been an important pillar with reference to the state system in international relations. Benno Teschke interprets it as a myth and reinterprets it, gives it a new meaning, that is with reference to the making of modern international relations from the 8th to the 18th century. His work is inspired by the work of Robert Brenner, and herein Teschke points out that social property relations are important to understand the changing meaning of international. Long-term interaction of class conflict The economic development and international rivalry affected the formation of the modern system of states. Geopolitics remains governed by the dynastic and absolutist political communities rooted in feudal property regimes. As for Benoteshke in his work The Myth of 1648, that is, this onset of modern international relations begins with the conjunction of rise of capitalism and modern state formation in England. Another important perspective, while we understand capitalism with reference to its nature, history, and its situation in the contemporary times, we can get it from Ellen Meiksins Wood's work, The Origin of Capitalism. Let us quote some important lines from the work. That is, the unique relation between producers and appropriators is, of course, mediated by the market. Market of various kinds have existed throughout recorded history, and no doubt before, as people have exchanged and sold their surpluses in many different ways and for many different purposes. But the market in capitalism has a distinctive, unprecedented function. Virtually everything in capitalist society is a commodity produced for the market. Quoting further from Ellen Meiksins Wood's work, The Origin of Capitalism, that is, how the unique system of market dependence has specific systemic requirements and compulsion shared by no other mode of production, imperatives of competition, accumulation, and profit maximization, hence a constant systemic need to develop productive forces. These imperatives in turn mean that capitalism can constantly expand in ways and degrees unlike any other social form. Quoting from the work of Ellen Meiksins Wood's The Origin of Capitalism. Today we all know that we are living in an era of globalization. Globalization has its own challenges and opportunities. It is a highly contested phenomenon, and globalization has always existed, as we can see with the presence of Silk Route as a global route. But today globalization has an important aspect, that is Western capitalism, especially neoliberalism. And therefore it is often argued that capitalism is an influential driving force of globalization, that is, with the establishment of global circuit of capital based on the nature of profit making. Further, it is often argued that globalization process is closely related to the development and expansion of capitalist economic system. So dear learners, we hope that the lecture presented you significant inputs, understanding of causes, insights on debates, and the present situation with reference to the topic of historical development and evolution of capitalism. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.